Good morning, folks. It's great to be able to be with you again this Sunday. In just a few moments, we're going to hear from Chris's brother, Bobby Pender. He's got a message for us, and then after that, we'll take communion together. But first, just a couple of songs of worship. Please join in and worship our God this morning with us.
Sing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me, and like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. Through many dangerous toils and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that bore me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me, and like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. When we've been there 10,000 years, soul. You are my reason and my all. Lord of the earth, fire of the stars, Jesus, my life is where you are. May our worship be your throne, for the praise of your glory forever. In this holy place, let your will be done. May your praise be lifted up, for the praise of your glory forever. To the ends of the earth, let your kingdom come. Joy of my days, you are my strength. Here I am sheltered in your hand. Light of the dawn, power of the sea, deep in your heart, you carry me. Song of my heart, breath of my soul, you are my reason and my all. Lord of the earth, fire of the stars, Jesus, my life is where you are. May our worship be your throne, for the praise of your glory forever. In this holy place, let your will be done. May your praise be lifted up, for the praise of your glory forever. To the ends of the earth, let your kingdom come. May your worship be your throne, for the praise of your glory forever. In this holy place, let your will be done. May your praise be lifted up, for the praise of your glory forever. To the ends of the earth, let your kingdom come.
Thank you for inviting me again to bring some messages to yourselves. It was indeed a pleasure when I visited the West Country and was able to speak to you all and enjoyed your company very much. I want to just bring your attention to the situation that we find ourselves in here at this very present time. The days of lockdown and what lockdown has meant to us all, not being able to go out, being restricted in movements, standing in queues. Do you remember at the very beginning, the long queues at the supermarket? When you got into the supermarket, there was very little food. People became very, very greedy and selfish. These are the things that happen when people are in lockdown and not certain of the future. I remember when I worked in Serbia during the war, doing medical work over there, we went out to the refugee camps, and in the refugee camps we were given medicine, but the day that the ambassadors' wives arrived with a load of food and clothes and Wellington boots, the surgery and the clinic, all patients disappeared, and they all ran to the lorries, and with greed they would fight, they would squabble, and you would go into the dormitories afterwards and find sometimes 15 pairs of Wellington boots hidden under their beds. They didn't need them, but it was survival. And when we turn our Bibles to Judges chapter 6, I want to speak about a situation of lockdown. I'm going to read it to you. And again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites, because the power of Midian was so oppressive. The Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in the mountains, the cliffs, the caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites and the Amalekites and the other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count the men and their camels. They invaded the land to ravish it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. When the Israelites cried to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I snatched you from the power of Egypt and from the hand of all oppressors. I drove them from before you and gave you their land. I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you live. But you have not listened to me." The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Oreb that belonged to Joash, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in the winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." "But sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has this all happened to us? Where are all the wonders that our fathers told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and put us into the hands of the Midians." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of the Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" But Lord, Gideon asked, "How can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and will strike down all the Midianites together." Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that is really you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set before you." And the Lord said, "I will wait until you return. Gideon went in and prepared a young goat, and from the ephah of flour he had made bread without yeast. Putting the meat in the basket and his broth in a pot, he brought them out and offered them under the oak. And the angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and place on this rock and pour out the broth. And Gideon did so. And with the tip of his staff that was in his hand, the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread. I want you to try and imagine, to come with me into the situation that the Israelites found themselves. They had come out from their land of Egypt. They had been rescued. They'd been brought into promised land. Everything was going well for them until they put God second. They started to, as it were, worship other gods. They put their faith and their reliance and their welfare on the secular and turned their back on God. And because of this, when you put God out of your life, then problems inevitably start to come. As we read there, it says that the Amorites and the Midianites and other eastern nations all gathered together, and when they came, it says that their camels were like locusts. There were so many of them. There were thousands and thousands of soldiers. And when they came in, they always timed their invasion at the time of harvest. And so when the time of harvest, just before the harvest was coming up, can you imagine those Israelites tending their crop, tending their wheat, and all the time looking over the shoulder, waiting to hear the rumble of the camels, to hear the noise and the clatter of the warriors coming to them. And so they thought, well, we better go, we better hide, we better go into lockdown. A little bit like what we've gone through just now. We haven't been able to see this enemy, this COVID-19 virus. I don't have it a privilege, but I've had experience of seeing some of the patients suffering with this terrible virus. It starts with a tickly cough. It starts with a dryness, and then shortage of breath. And within hours, healthy people are just going down like flies. Because of the severity of it all over the world, country after country after country, even right into our own country, we go into lockdown. Those that are over 70 were just told to stay in their house. We were told to keep 3 meters apart. We were told not to go out, not to touch anything belonging to anyone else. Families were separated. Can you feel the anguish that the children of Israel felt here with all this virus of an army encroaching them? The Bible tells us here that they ran into the hills, into caves, into strongholds to try and hide from this enemy. And then they started to cry, God, why has this happened to us? Look at what you've done to us before. Why has this happened? And they cried out. And I'm glad to say that no matter how we treat God, God always treats us with love and grace and kindness. We can disappoint him, but he never disappoints us. And so when they cried, God answered, and he raised up, in this time of no leaders in their country, he raised up this young man, Gideon. Now, Gideon was the youngest of his family. He came from the smallest tribe of the region. He came from a very low stature. And isn't it amazing that God takes the insignificant person to use in a time of crisis. We can go through the Bible all the way along, and you'll find that God takes the weak and makes them strong. Remember my last message to you, I talked about the acacia wood to build the temple. Not the great cedars, but the twisted, deformed acacia wood was taken, broken down, and fitted together for a habitation of God. And here in this situation, here is Gideon. He is in a wine press, and he is working the wheat to get corn. A very strange place to make food. A very strange place to be grinding wheat. Because normally what would happen, they would grind the wheat in the open on a big stone, and there would be an oxen would be winding and walking, and the wheat would be ground down, and because it was outside, the chaff would be blown away. But here, deep in a wine press, he would be doing by hand. It was hard, so there would be very little food, but what he was making for his family to keep them survival. And when God spoke to him, the first thing I noticed that he says, okay, God, I don't know why you're choosing me, but if you're choosing me, let me make an offering to you. And even though he had very little, the little they had, he was prepared to sacrifice. And it says that he made a sacrifice and gave it to the Lord. During the lockdown, we've had a lot of time to think. I know I have. I've thought about when I was in college, when I studied the Bible. I thought about when I started off my ministry, and the many times I just cracked up and didn't work out. I thought about the time when I retrained in physiotherapy and enjoyed it, had great fun. Then I studied hyperbaric medicine. Again, I started tracing back, and why has things gone wrong? Why did I not stay in that one path, that one area? And every time I thought and searched and looked back, it came back to me. Maybe you were seeking yourself. Maybe you were promoting, as it were, popularity. In my early years in the ministry, I became the youth commissioner, the youth leader for the whole of the area. I was asked to preach in many, many big rallies. And I think now in this deep, dark time of lockdown, I began to think, I think maybe I was getting too proud with myself of my achievements. But as I look at Gideon here, as he's thinking all the time, he's questioning, he's saying, God, but God, I'm the wrong person. I haven't got these strengths. And all the time God would say to him, and the message would say to him, but you'll be going in my strength. You'll be doing the things that I say. It will not be your words. It will not be your strength. It will not be your strategy. It will be me. Just be willing to go. And so, eventually Gideon surrenders to the plan of God. Now, the first thing he did, before the battle was won, he had to destroy the things that had gone old and gone wrong. The scripture tells us that he was instructed to take down the altars of Baal and the pole of Ashereth. You see, they were living as the Israelites, as the people of God, but they'd wandered away from God's ways, God's thinking, God's planning, and they started worshipping other gods. The god Baal, they built an altar. That altar was about 26 foot high, made with massive rocks, bonded together with mud, which will then become like concrete. So right in the heart of their city where they lived, the first thing, the central point that they would see would be this massive image, this massive altar to this god of Baal. They also had this pole, the Asterisk pole. This was to the goddess of the sea of fertility. And you see, the whole life was surrounded, everything they did, every movement they did was governed round this false altar. And he was instructed to take down the altar that his father built. And so he gathered a small group of people. And because of fear of his own family and of those in the town, of the rage, of their anger that he would be taking this down, they did it at night. I want you to come with me to this situation. I want you to see, as it were, God's sense of humour. Here's this small grand band of people with their bare hands, and they're hauling down this massive monument, this massive altar. Crunch, crash. I don't think it would be very quiet. But amazingly, the village, the town, the people did not hear it. Once they had dismantled this altar and pushed it away, and they'd taken down this pole of acid and snapped it and threw it on the ground. There they then built a new altar, a place to recognize that God was the sovereign God, the God above all other gods. And then they made the sacrifice. The Bible says that they went into the field where there was the animal. And they brought that animal, and there they laid it on the altar, and they made this animal as an offering unto God. As the daylight started to come through the skies, the village started to wake up and they started to come round. Can you see them? Sniffing? I smell cooked meat. Who's making an offering at this time in the morning? The shock in their faces as they could see that their old God, their old altar to their other gods was crushed and broken down. And there placed in the middle of the offering was a sweet smelling sacrifice to God. I find it very interesting that the village woke up to a smell reaching out into their homes, reaching out into the streets, reaching out into the alleyways. They didn't hear the noise of the breaking down of the old altar, but no matter where they went, in the stillness of the morning, the whole area was saturated with a beautiful smell of an offering to God. During this lockdown that we are experiencing, wouldn't it be great if the church and the Christians, if we put all that has gone wrong in our life, in our devotion to God, wouldn't it be great if we forgave those who we've got things against? Wouldn't it be great that we could reach out and help others outside, the broken, the bleeding? Wouldn't it be great at the end of this lockdown, as we walk out, the people in the West Country, the people in London would walk out and go, there's something different. There's a change. Those people who call themselves God's children, the Christians, there's something different about them. There's a sweet smell coming off them. There's kindness. There's love. There's forgiveness. They don't look at the colour of the skin. They look at humanity and they help. They see the person who is lying homeless and in the street, and rather than walk by, they chat to them. They find out something about them. Not only do they give them some food, but they help them, lift them up and bring them back into society. The young teenagers that go around fighting and stabbing, they walk into the midst and they tell them of a love of God that can heal. They go into the streets where prostitution is rife and where women are used as sex slaves, and they say, enough is enough. Wouldn't it be great if all around they could smell a difference coming out of the lockdown? And as I finish, I just want to say, in my next message, I'll be talking about they went into battle. And Gideon, at the beginning, thought, well, I'll make an invitation to come and join me to fight the Midianites and the Amorites. And mighty thousands turned up. But God said, no. I don't want that number. And God brought that number down just to over 100 people. And that 100 people went out and won an amazing victory, an amazing battle. This is going to prove to the people of Israel, it's not man that wins the battle. It's not man that becomes the hero, but is God. And so my next message will be the battle, the small number, and how God won the battle. We shall also look at how Gideon was criticised, how he dealt with criticism. It's not fair, I didn't do that. And he dealt with that. And then lastly, he will look and deal with success. Two things that can cripple our lives is criticism, and the other thing is success. When we become successful, we forget who gave us the success. May God bless you. May you be encouraged in this lockdown, this hard time, to use it as a time to build up, to get yourself right with God, and to pull down the old altars, the old things that have taken over your life, and put God first and the world outside and help them. Thank you very much for listening.